Part 1. The clay that listens. In a quiet valley nestled between soft green mountains of old Hosien, there was a village so still, even the wind seemed to step gently. Here, mornings arrived, not with alarms or voices, but with the hushed sweep of brooms on stone, and the muffled thud of tea leaves falling into warm cups. At the edge of this village, past the last row of persimmon trees, stood a workshop with low wooden beams, paper doors, and a roof heavy with moss. It belonged to Eun-ho the potter, or as the elders called him, Gigi Tro Chyan Vivi Jadeset, the man who spoke to clay. No one remembered exactly when Eun-ho had come to the village. Some said he had been there since he was a boy, others whispered that he had wandered in with nothing but a pack and a bowl, and the mountain chose to keep him. He lived alone, though never seemed lonely. Every day, before the village woke, he lit the hearth in his kiln and boiled barley tea, letting its steam rise into the pale morning air. He would sit quietly in his open courtyard, warming his hands on the tea bowl, and when the silence settled thick enough, he began his work. Eun-ho did not start by shaping clay. First, he listened. He knelt beside the basin of river-soaked earth, cool, breathing softly beneath a cloth. He dipped in his fingers. "How are you today?" he would murmur, then wait, as if the clay would answer. The villagers found this odd, but comforting. They said the bowls made by Eun-ho felt warm, even when empty. His moon jars glowed under candlelight as if lit from within. His teacups never cracked, even through winter frost. And when you drank from them, you somehow remembered things you'd forgotten, like the scent of your grandmother's scarf, or the hum of cicadas in a childhood summer. He never rushed his hands. He turned his wheel slowly, like time itself was circling with him. And as the clay rose, bowl by bowl, his voice came never louder than the wind through reeds. "Be round, but not proud," he'd whisper. "Hold warmth, but do not cling to it. You will break, someday. That's all right." No two bowls were ever alike. He said they each had a soul. Sometimes, if a bowl cracked during firing, he would repair it with gold lacquer. "Now it remembers it's breaking," he would say, brushing a thumb over the gleam, "and that makes it honest." Children often tiptoed into his yard after school. Curious, he let them sit quietly on the low stone bench and watch. If they stayed still enough, he'd pour them tea and tell them what he'd heard in the clay that day. One cloudy afternoon, a little girl named Sumi asked Ajushi, "Do bowls really have ears?" Eun-ho chuckled, folding his palms. "Not ears like you and me, but yes. If you speak kindly, they listen." "And do they talk back?" He leaned down, looked her in the eyes. "Only if you're very, very patient." That night, Eun-ho lit a lantern and placed a new bowl on the shelf. It was smaller than the others, and slightly lopsided. He smiled at it with fondness, like an old friend returning after a long absence. He sat by his window, writing something in a worn notebook no one had ever seen. Outside, the moon lifted over the mountains like a bowl of light, and the sound of the wind brushing against the paper walls was the only sound in the world. In the village, people were already drifting into sleep. Crickets tuned their songs, a dog yawned once and curled by a porch. And in one quiet house, a child told her mother, "I want a bowl that listens to me." The mother smiled, brushing the girl's hair, then whispered gently, like the potter. Part 2. Firelight and memory. Long before the sun reached the rim of the mountains, Eun-ho had already been awake. The scent of pine wood drifted from his chimney, mixing with the faint perfume of drying herbs hanging along the veranda. Birds were still considering whether to sing. The world held its breath, suspended between darkness and light. Inside his workshop, Eun-ho moved like memory, and hurried, precise and familiar. The coals in the kiln were still warm from the night before, pulsing quietly like the last thoughts before sleep. He wrapped himself in his indigo robe, soft from years of wear, and walked barefoot across the cool wooden floor. Outside, dew clung to the edges of his stepping stones. The moss welcomed each footfall like an old friend. Today, he would fire a dozen teacups. Each had been shaped during a rain-heavy week. Clay behaves differently when the air is thick with moisture. It listens better, he always said. It becomes gentler, like someone learning to forgive. Eun-ho lifted a cup from the drying shelf. Its curve was imperfect, slightly uneven on one side, where his thumb had pressed too long. He ran his finger along it slowly, like tracing a memory he didn't want to disturb. "Stay strong through fire," he whispered, "and remember why you were made." He stacked the cups gently inside the kiln. one by one, each nestled in its place, like sleeping birds in a nest. Then he closed the iron hatch and lit the flame. The fire came alive with a low breath. He sat back, pouring himself barley tea, and opened the window beside his wheel. Mist moved through the trees like silk in water. He listened not for sound, but for stillness. His eyes landed on a single photograph, framed simply, leaning on a shelf above the tea bowls. It was old. The paper had curled at the edges. A young woman stood beneath a cherry blossom tree, holding a bowl in her hands. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon. She was smiling, but not at the camera. That was long ago. He reached for a small, spiral-bound notebook tucked behind a row of brushes. Its cover was faded blue, the ink worn smooth where his fingers often touched. Inside were notes, glazes, temperatures, drying times. But deeper in the pages, there were other things, quiet entries, dated not by numbers, but by seasons and feelings. The kiln cracked today, so did my heart, a little. She didn't come. He closed the book gently, as if to let the thought rest undisturbed. The cups inside the kiln began to sing, not music, but tiny cracks and shifts, the sound of clay, transforming. This part always made him feel reverent. The fire did what the hands could not. It revealed truth. Outside footsteps approached, soft, cautious. Sumi, the little girl from yesterday, stood at his gate, holding something in her hand. He opened the door, surprised. "I brought you this," she said, lifting a flower, bruised at one petal but still bright. "You said bowls, listen. Maybe they like flowers, too." He took it carefully and bowed. "They'll be very happy. So will I." She looked around at the shelves. "Did they talk to you today?" He nodded, smiling softly. One of them said, "She's afraid of the fire, but ready." Sumi's eyes widened. "Can I make one? A bowl?" Eun-ho hesitated only a moment, then knelt down beside her. "Only if you promise to listen as much as you speak." She nodded with the kind of certainty only children have. He took her to the wheel, washed her hands, and placed a small lump of clay in the center. The wheel turned, slowly, like time learning how to begin again. Together, their hands shaped a bowl, small, uneven, and full of wonder. As evening crept in, and shadows softened the lines of the mountains, Eun-ho set the new bowl beside the others. He didn't say anything, but he placed Sumi's flower inside it. The fire flickered, the tea cooled. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang from the temple, low and gentle. Night was arriving, and in his quiet home, a potter poured tea. Opened his notebook, and wrote just 3 words. "Today." She listened. Part 3. The jar that waited. The next morning, the kiln was still warm when Eun-ho opened it. The teacups had cooled, their colors deepened by fire glazes of pale celadon, some kissed by soft speckles like morning dew on leaves. He lifted each one as though waking a child, listening for cracks, feeling the smoothness with quiet pride. Sumi's bowl, though he left on the windowsill, it hadn't been fired. It would need more days to dry, more nights to breathe. But the flower she left inside had begun to wilt, and its scent had sweetened the clay. Eun-ho replaced the blossom with a tiny feather he'd found that morning near the well. "You'll carry stories someday," he whispered to the bowl. "Even small hands can hold great silence." After breakfast, he turned to an older jar, one that had sat on his highest shelf for years. It was tall and narrow, with a long neck and a lid shaped like a plum blossom. No one ever asked about it, and Eun-ho never offered to explain, but today, he brought it down. He wiped away the thin film of dust with the sleeve of his robe, then placed the jar in the center of his work table. His fingers hovered over its surface, tracing the faded cracks that ran like veins across the glaze. It had broken once long ago and been mended with golden lacquer. Carefully, lovingly, it was the only piece he had never sold, never gifted, never even shown. Eun-ho sat beside it and poured a cup of barley tea. He drank in silence. Then, he opened the jar. Inside was a folded piece of hanji paper, pale as smoke and soft from time. He held it for a long while before unfolding it, his breath deep and even. The letter was written in a woman's hand, delicate strokes, slightly slanted, as if she had written it while walking or trembling. "My dear Eun-ho, I cannot stay. Not because I don't love you, but because I love you too quietly to make you wait forever. You speak to bowls, to fire, to clay, but not to me. And I wanted to be heard." Eun-ho folded the letter again, pressing its creases with both palms. His hands did not shake, not anymore. He looked out the window. The mountains stood as they always had, unchanging, wise, and patient. Just like the jar, just like him. Wise, and patient, just like the jar, just like him. That afternoon, Sumi returned. She brought her mother, this time a woman in her 30s, with eyes that looked as if they carried 1,000 errands and a few unspoken songs. She bowed deeply. "A juicy," she said. "My daughter talks about you often. I hope she's not a bother." Eun-ho smiled. "A quiet child who listens. Never a bother." Sumi ran ahead to check on her bowl. "Is it ready?" she asked. "Almost," Eun-ho said. "But do you want to know a secret?" She nodded. "Clay dries best when it hears a story." Sumi beamed and sat down beside the bowl. Her voice lowered into a whisper, and she began telling the bowl about her day, how her teacher scolded someone for sleeping in class, how a squirrel almost stole her rice cake, how she dreamed of flying on a crane's back. The bowl didn't move, but it listened. Of that, Eun-ho was certain. The mother stayed back, watching. "Did you make all of these?" she asked, glancing around the shelves. "Yes," he said. "Each one has a story. Some tell it better than others." She paused at the jar on the table. "And that one?" Eun-ho looked at it for a moment, then said softly, "That one is waiting for its story to end." There was no sadness in his voice, only a kind of hush that settles before a bell chimes. That evening, after they left, Eun-ho placed the jar back on the high shelf. He didn't need to read the letter again. The words had lived in him longer than silence itself. As night fell, he poured a new cup of tea and lit the lamp by his writing desk. He opened the blue notebook and wrote, "Some stories dry slowly, but they do dry, and someday they are ready for fire." Outside, the moon crept through pine branches like a quiet guest. Inside, the potter listened to the stillness, and the stillness listened back. Part 4. The whisper of Ash's rain came that night. Not loud or angry, just a steady whisper, like silk brushing along the rooftop, like a memory returning without being called. The kind of rain that deepens the silence, inviting old things to speak. Eun-ho stayed awake long after the candle burned low. He sat beside the open window, listening to the rain fall on the stone path in his courtyard, on the kill's rounded roof, on the moss beneath the persimmon tree. He wasn't waiting for anything, just remembering. Across from him, the small bowl Sumi had shaped rested under a cloth. The feather she had left was now tucked inside it, slightly damp, curling at the tip. He reached over and touched the edge of the clay, still fragile, still forming. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Don't hurry." He wasn't sure if he was speaking to the bowl, to the past, or to himself. In the morning, the air smelled of wet pine and old earth. The mountains were veiled in mist so thick they seemed to be dreaming. Eun-ho boiled water and dropped 2 pieces of ginger into his kettle. The scent filled the house slowly, like light pooling on the floor. He poured the tea into a shallow cup, one that he had fired many years ago, a pale blue glaze, cracked, in soft spiderweb lines, repaired once with gold. He called it the first silence. He drank slowly, then placed the cup near the window to let it breathe. There were no visitors that day. No Sumi. No curious neighbors. Just the sound of rain drying on leaves and the quiet breath of a house that had learned to be alone. Later, Eun-ho opened a wooden chest tucked beneath his sleeping mat. Inside were scraps of old linen, a brush wrapped in silk, and a flat stone the size of his palm. He held the stone up to the light. It was plain and smooth, unremarkable to anyone else. But to him, it was the first stone he had placed beside his first kill, the first fire, the first bowl. He remembered burning his thumb that day, not because he had touched the heat too early, but because he had been too eager, too impatient. He remembered the woman, too, the one with the letter. She had sat on that very bench, long ago, when the rain came, just like this. She had laughed at how serious he was when speaking to Clay. "You're gentler with bowls than with people," she had teased. And he had replied without looking at her, "Bowls don't leave." He didn't know, then, that she would. Eun-ho placed the stone on the table beside Sumi's bowl. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps to remind the young Clay that fire was coming and that even stone had once been soft. He lit incense. The scent of sandalwood drifted through the house. He took a fresh page in his blue notebook and wrote, "Some ash holds shape, some shape holds ash. Both remember the fire." He closed the notebook gently. Outside, the rain had stopped, the mist lifted, and from the far hills, a bird called out low and lonely, but not sad, just honest. and in his quiet home, the potter prepared for another day of listening. Part 5. The day the wheel stopped, to be continued. The potter's wheel sat still. For the first time in many seasons, Eun-ho didn't touch the clay that morning. The basin sat full, the river-soaked earth breathing faintly under linen, but his hands remained folded in his lap. He sat beside the low table, tea untouched, as the light slanted through the open paper doors. A quiet ache had settled in his joints, part age, part weather, part something harder to name. It wasn't pain exactly, it was waiting. He looked around the room, as if seeing it not as a potter, but as someone just passing through. The kiln in the corner, the shelves heavy with stories, the brush pot, the single cracked jar that had never left its place on the high shelf. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of smoke, of the echo of conversations once whispered to bowls. He glanced at the drying shelf. Sumi's bowl had hardened, still imperfect, still childlike, but holding something honest, a small spirit. He smiled. A knock came, light, hesitant. It was the mother this time, alone. She bowed. I hope I'm not disturbing. Sumi is with her grandmother. I came to return something. She held out a box, wooden, simple, tied with twine. Her fingers lingered on it before she let go. Inside was one of Eun-ho's early bowls, glazed in dark ink blue, the rim slightly chipped. He remembered it. He had given it to someone, a long time ago. Not the woman with the letter. Someone before even that. It was my mother's, the woman said softly. She used to say, tea tasted kinder from this bowl. Eun-ho nodded, but said nothing. I found it while cleaning. I thought maybe it should come home. He looked at the bowl, then at her. It never left. They shared a long silence, broken only by the whistle of wind through pine branches. Finally, she asked, "May I watch you work?" He hesitated. "I didn't plan to throw today." "Then maybe I'll just sit," she said, smiling gently. She sat on the old stone bench where Sumi often perched, her hands folded politely, her gaze soft, curious. Eun-ho poured tea. No words, just the gentle clink of ceramic, the steam curling between them. After a time, he stood and walked to the wheel. He uncovered the basin. His fingers sank into the clay, cool and yielding. He shaped a small lump and placed it at the center of the wheel. He didn't ask why he was working. Some movements are answers in themselves. The wheel began to spin slowly, steadily. His hands moved with memory, water, pressure, breath, rise, curve, ease. The woman watched, unmoving. He shaped a cup, round, slightly tapered at the lip, a vessel for warmth. He finished, then looked at her. "Would you like to name it?" She blinked, surprised. Me, he nodded. She thought for a long moment. "Call it Still Morning," he smiled. Fitting she stood. "Thank you for letting me sit." He bowed slightly. As she left, her steps softened by the mossy stones. The sun passed through the trees, casting dappled shadows over the quiet courtyard. Inside, the wheel stopped, but something had begun again. Part 6. Glazes of Memory. That evening, as dusk painted the ridges of the mountains in quiet indigo, Eun-ho sat before a row of newly thrown cups, still damp, still breathing. He turned one gently in his hand, letting the soft clay speak. This was the part he loved most. Not shaping, not firing, but glazing. Glaze was memory. Each mixture, a blend of ash, water, minerals, and silence. A whisper added to the surface, invisible, until fire revealed it. He reached for his old lacquered box. Inside were dozens of small, labeled jars. Some bore names like morning fog, winter sky, bitter plum. Others had no name at all, just seasons scribbled in soft graphite. Late autumn, rain after goodbye. He chose a jar marked First Light. The mixture inside was the color of milk with a whisper of moss. He stirred it slowly, listening to the brush whisper against the bowl. One stroke, then another. Some potters glazed with certainty. Eun-ho glazed with questions. He worked quietly until the light dimmed, and the moths came to rest against the paper doors. He paused. From his shelf, he pulled down a coupled, uneven, a failed piece, by most standards, but it had been glazed long ago with a mixture he never repeated. It shimmered faintly with soft pinks and grays, like a dream half remembered. It had been hers. He ran his thumb along its rim and placed it on the table beside the bowl Sumi made. 2 stories, side by side. He poured tea, even though he didn't intend to drink, just for the scent, the comfort of steam. The next morning, the village buzzed quietly with news. A traveling merchant had arrived with a cart full of silk scraps and paper kites. Children ran through alleys with painted fishtails flapping in the wind. The temple bell rang once, long and slow. Eun-ho didn't go into town, but he stood at his gate for a long while, watching the kites dance above the trees. Just before noon, Sumi returned. Her cheeks were pink from running. Her hair smelled faintly of wind. "My bowl," she exclaimed. He smiled. "It's ready to be fired." She peered into the kiln wide-eyed. "Will it be scared?" Eun-ho crouched beside her. "Everyone's a little afraid of change, even bowls. But fire is just part of growing." She thought about that, then nodded. As he prepared to kill, she wandered his garden, picking small wildflowers and humming a tune. When the kiln was sealed and the fire lit, she sat beside him on the step. "Ajushi," she said, "do you think bowls remember who touched them first?" He looked into the flame. "I think they remember kindness, and hands that don't rush." She nodded again, as if this confirmed something she'd always believed. That night, Eun-ho opened his blue notebook. The child teaches the clay how to hope, and the fire teaches it how to stay. The rain didn't come, but the wind did, soft, pine-scented, full of secrets. He let the door stay open just a little longer that night, in case any of them wanted to come inside. Part 7. Letters in the clay. Eun-ho always said that clay could hear, not just sound, but everything. Breath, silence, memory. That's why he never sang while shaping. It felt like interrupting a story that was already speaking. The morning, after Sumi's bowl went into the fire, the workshop held a stillness deeper than usual, the kind of hush that follows transformation. The kiln had cooled through the night, bricks exhaling faint warmth, like a resting animal after long labor. Eun-ho didn't rush. He drank his tea slowly, cleaned his brushes, folded the cloths by the basin, let time breathe. Only when the first sparrow called from the roof tile did he open the kiln. Inside, the bowls glowed faintly in the morning light. Not literally, of course, but there was always a shimmer to freshly fired pieces, like something just born, unsure of its name. Sumi's bowl sat near the back. Its glaze had run slightly on one side, pooling into a tiny blue crescent along the foot. A mistake, perhaps, but to Eun-ho, it looked like the sky trying to hold a secret. He smiled. When Sumi arrived later, he let her lift the bowl herself. She held it like it might breathe. "It's warm," she whispered. "All true things are," he said. That afternoon, after she left with her treasure wrapped in cloth, Eun-ho returned to a task he had long delayed. He lifted the jar from the high shelf once again. But this time, he didn't just open it, he emptied it. The letter, the dried petal, the small wooden comb she had left behind. He placed them carefully on the table. Then, with slow hands, he began to clean the inside of the jar with a soft cloth. Dust, ash, time. He wasn't erasing her, just making room. Later, in the fading afternoon light, Eun-ho did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a letter, not in his blue notebook, but on fresh hanji paper, the kind that crackled softly when folded. He didn't write with the sharp, slanted lines of habit, but round, careful strokes, like speaking to someone who'd just woken from sleep. "You once said I speak more to clay than to people. Maybe because clay listens without asking to be answered. But I've learned something. That silence is only gentle when shared." He folded the letter, slipped it into a small envelope, and tucked it inside the cleaned jar. Then, with brush and gold dust, he painted a single character on the jar's side, waiting. But he didn't return the jar to the high shelf. He placed it on the low windowsill, where the morning light would touch it first. That night, he dreamed of bowls that sang, not with voices, but with light, and a woman with cherry blossoms in her hair, smiling not sadly this time, but as if she'd finally been heard. Part 8. The visitor from the north. 2 days after he placed the jar on the windowsill, a traveler arrived. She came at midday, when the sky was high and full of slow-moving clouds. Her hat was wide, her robe plain but well-kept, the hem still dusted with the color of distant roads. She carried nothing but a cloth-wrapped bundle and a folded map tucked into her sleeve. Eun-ho had just finished washing his brushes when she appeared at the gate. She didn't knock, just waited. He looked up and met her, eyes clear, steady, with the quiet knowing of someone who had heard too many stories to be surprised by any more. "I've walked from the north," she said softly. "I was told the potter who listens lives here." "I used to," Eun-ho replied, without smiling. "Now I just watch clay, remember." The woman bowed. "My brother spoke of you," she said. He died last winter, but he kept a bowl by his window every day. It was signed only with this. She reached into her bundle and pulled out a small tea bowl, pale glaze with a thumbprint embedded near the base. Eun-ho blinked. He remembered the piece, one of the few he had ever sold during a market in the capital, years ago. He hadn't even signed it, only pressed his thumb into the clay before it dried an unconscious farewell. "I made this," he said, almost to himself. The woman nodded. He said it helped him sleep. Eun-ho invited her in. They sat facing the garden, now touched with the first amber of autumn. The persimmon tree had begun to fruit against small golden orbs, tucked between leaves like forgotten lanterns. She didn't speak much, only listened. "Eun-ho liked that in time?" she asked. "Do you remember every bowl?" "No," he said honestly, "but I remember the ones that waited." He showed her the jar by the window. She leaned close, ran her finger over the golden character on its side. "Waiting," she read. "Is this yours?" "It was," he replied, "but perhaps now it belongs to the morning." Before she left, she placed something beside the door, a slip of cloth. Inside it, a pressed blue flower. "It bloomed near his window," she said. "He always said it smelled like stories." Eun-ho took it with both hands. "Then it belongs in glaze." She smiled, soft, satisfied. Not quite joy, not sorrow either. Just something in between. "May I return someday?" she asked. "The door will remember you," he replied. That evening, Eun-ho stood in front of his shelf of jars and bowls and cracked cups. He looked at each one not as vessels, but as voices, as moments, as pauses in the great, rushing breath of time. He reached for his brush, dipped it in glaze the color of twilight, and began a new piece. No form in mind, just silence, and the memory of a blue flower blooming by a window. Part 9. The bowl that waited too long. The morning light poured in like melted rice, paper soft and gold, slow to move. Eun-ho stood in front of the shelves, a glaze-stained cloth in hand. He wasn't cleaning, exactly, just touching, letting his fingers remember each curve and edge, each line where the flame had kissed too hard or too little. His hands hovered over an old bowl tucked near the bottom corner. It had been there for years. It was quiet, almost shy. He picked it up. It was uneven, its shape slightly slouched to one side. The glaze was pale, almost unfinished, with a faint bloom of lavender hidden beneath the surface. One tiny chip on the rim barely noticeable. He remembered shaping it during a stormy season, when the river overflowed and the roads turned to silk mud. He had meant to fire it but never did. It had sat on the shelf, waiting, patient, undemanding. "I forgot." "You," he whispered. "I'm sorry." He turned it in his hand. It was lighter than he expected, as if it had shed the weight of waiting over the years. That afternoon, Sumi returned. She brought a gift, a bundle of dried ginger wrapped in mulberry paper, for tea, she said proudly. Eun-ho accepted it with both hands. Her bowl sat on a cloth nearby, still whole, still radiant in its odd, perfect imperfection. She walked around the workshop like she belonged there now. Her fingers brushed the jars, her eyes skipping across the rows of pieces. Then she paused. "A jushi?" she asked, pointing to the misshapen bowl he'd taken down. "Why does that one look sad?" Eun-ho blinked. He hadn't said anything, but children always see. "It waited too long," he said softly. Sumi crouched beside it. "Can you still fire it?" "Yes," he said. "But it might break." "Maybe it won't," she said, and smiled. That evening, Eun-ho sat before the kiln with two bowls in his lap, one young, filled with feather and laughter, the other old, filled with silence and memory. He placed both inside, lit the fire, and whispered, "Be kind." As the flames rose, the bowls turned red, then white, then still. Eun-ho sat back and let the fire speak. Later that night, as moonlight folded itself around the house, Eun-ho wrote in his blue notebook, "Even the forgotten ones will sing again if we listen with gentler ears." He closed the book and slept without dreams. Part 10. Fire marks and feather cracks. The kiln had cooled. All morning, Eun-ho walked with care. He moved like someone approaching an old friend who might have forgotten him or remembered too much. His hands were steady, but his breath came slow. Sumi wasn't there. She had left a note, drawn in crayon and bound with a string of tiny beads. "Don't open the kiln without me." Sumi and the feather, he smiled, but he opened it anyway. Inside, the fire had left its signature. Sumi's bowl had deepened in color, no longer pale, but a warm gray-blue, with a veil of tiny white specks across the surface. Near the base, the feather she had pressed in too hard had cracked, just slightly, leaving a hairline line like a whisper. Eun-ho touched the crack. It felt like something honest. He lifted the old forgotten bowl next. It had survived. The glaze had bloomed into a lavender mist, with threads of ash wash painting a single swirl across the rim. That swirl hadn't been planned. It had come from the fire, one final act of remembering. When Sumi returned, she squealed with delight. "It's beautiful," she said, cradling the bowl like a newborn star. "And look, my feather left a lightning mark." He nodded. Cracks are just the places where stories breathe out. She didn't quite understand, but she smiled anyway. That afternoon, she sat by the garden and painted her name on the bottom of the bowl in golden ink. Her letters were crooked, joyful. She added a second word underneath, together. "Can we have tea in them now?" she asked. Eun hesitated, then fetched his old tin of jasmine leaves. They sat side by side on the step, their feet not touching the ground. 2 cups, 2 bowls, 1 pot of tea, fragrant and faintly smoky, like rain drying on stone. They didn't speak much. The warmth of the clay bowls made their fingers still. The steam carried all the words they didn't need to say. Eun-ho poured slowly. Sumi sipped. The old bowl rested beside them, its lavender shimmer catching the last of the afternoon sun. That night, after Sumi left, Eun-ho placed both bowls on the shelf by the window. He rearranged the others to make room. Then he sat before his notebook. Some cracks hold light, some silence holds names. The kiln never forgets the hands that waited. He closed the book. Outside, the cicadas hummed their long summer song, not hurried, not loud, just remembering. And inside, the bowls listened. Part 11. The ink that wouldn't dry. It rained softly for 3 days. The kind of rain that didn't trouble roofs or roads, just enough to blur the lines of the hills and soften the breath of morning tea. Eun-ho welcomed it. The garden did, too. Moss grew thick along the stone steps. Ferns bowed under droplets like polite monks. Inside the workshop, the air was cool and damp. Eun-ho lit a single candle by the door, not for light, but for warmth. And because the flame reminded him that something, somewhere, still flickered. On the 4th morning, he found an old inkstone tucked behind a row of bowls, dusty, forgotten. Inside it, a brush still lay curled like a sleeping animal. The ink had long dried, or so he thought. When he added water and began to grind the ink, a faint shimmer appeared, almost silvery. He didn't remember ever owning silver ink. Curious, he dipped the brush and wrote a single character on the blank page of his notebook. Memory. But the ink wouldn't dry. Even as he left it by the window, the words stayed wet, glistening, as if it had only just been spoken, and wasn't ready to fade. That afternoon, Sumi didn't come, nor did she the next day. Eun-ho waited, made extra tea, left the gate slightly open. On the 3rd day, a folded note appeared in her usual spot, tucked between 2 garden stones. "Grandmother is sick. I'm helping Mama cook. I miss the bowls. Tell them not to forget me." He smiled and touched the paper to his heart. Then, he picked up one of Sumi's smaller pinch pots, a little clumsy, shaped like a baby moon, and wrote a message on its side with the strange silver ink. "We remember the hands that shaped us." He didn't fire it, just left it on the windowsill where the rain could read it, too. That evening, Eun-ho sat with his tea and the still wet word, memory. He thought about the people who had touched his life, not in grand ways, but gently, quietly. A nod at a market stall, a stranger offering ginger candy during a thunderstorm, a pair of eyes that held more stories than words. Some had stayed, some had left, all of them had left traces. He wrote again in the notebook, "There is ink that dries, and there is ink that waits for someone to return." Outside, the rain softened into mist, and somewhere in the distance, a wooden wind chime sang off key, imperfect, beautiful. Part 12. The scent beneath the lid. On the first dry morning after the long rain, Eun-ho opened the sliding doors of his workshop and let the sunlight in. It stretched softly across the floor like a warm cat, curling into corners, reaching under shelves, long untouched. The breeze brought the scent of damp earth and old wood, clean and grounding. He made tea as usual, then sat in stillness. No brush, no clay, just the sound of dripping leaves and the clink of porcelain. Then he noticed it. A small lidded jar tucked beneath his workbench. He didn't remember placing it there. When he brought it into the light, he paused. It was sealed with a twist of silk ribbon, frayed with age, faintly yellowed. The glaze shimmered like aged pearl. He had made this jar during a winter many years ago, before he began signing his work, before he knew what it meant to wait for someone. He untied the ribbon, lifted the lid, and was met with a scent so familiar it startled him. Dried tangerine, peel and plum blossom. He smiled. It was her scent. Not strong, not heavy, just the trace that lingers when memory walks gently across time. That evening, he lit the small charcoal brazier and placed a pinch of the tangerine peel in the shallow bowl above the flame. The scent deepened, drifting through the room like an old song. He took out his notebook and began to write, not in words, but in sketches. The curve of her wrist as she poured tea, the way she tilted her head when thinking, the little scar on her knuckle from trimming bamboo to fast. He didn't stop to explain any of it. He just drew, and when he finished, he folded the paper and placed it into the jar beside the scent, then sealed it again, not with ribbon this time, but with a slip of handmade paper and a gentle press of wax. Just before sleep, he stood at the door and looked out into the night garden. The persimmons now glowed like lanterns in the dusk. The stones were slick with moonlight, and the bowls on the shelf behind him, they seemed to hum, not with sound, but with remembering. He whispered, as if someone were listening. Some jars are never meant to be opened, but some are waiting just for one more breath. Part 13. The cracked spoon and the sound of first snow. The first snow came without warning. It arrived like a hush, soft, steady, quieting the village roofs and silencing even the wind chimes. Eun-ho woke before dawn, not from cold, but from the silence itself, that kind of deep, waiting silence only snow can bring. He stepped outside and listened. The world had turned pale. Footprints were sacred now. He boiled water for porridge, slicing ginger into thin moons, the way his mother had once done. The scent filled the room, comforting and warm. When it was done, he reached for his oldest spoon, a wooden one, cracked down the handle, smooth from decades of use. He remembered that spoon had fed his father in his final winter, and now it stirred quiet comfort again. Eun-ho carried the bowl of porridge to the low table beside the window, sat with it as if sitting with an old friend. Outside, snowflakes danced like shy paper birds. No to the same, all fading before they could land. Later that morning, Sumi returned. She had her mittens on the wrong hands. "I heard it snowed here first," she said, breath puffing into clouds. "So I ran." Her cheeks were red, her smile wide. Eun-ho handed her the warm spoon. She tasted, then whispered, "It tastes like remembering." They didn't speak. For a while, the snow kept falling. That afternoon, Eun-ho gave her a gift, a small box, carved from camphor wood. Inside was her bowl, now joined by a lid he had shaped just for it, glazed in snowy white, with a single blue dot in the center. "It's like the sky forgot something," she said. "Or remembered it," he replied. Inside the lid, hidden in the glaze, were words only visible at the right angle. "You are part of the story now." Sumi blinked. Her mittens touched her face. "I'm part." He nodded. She left just before dusk, skipping through the snow, her footsteps already fading. That evening, Eun-ho took the cracked spoon and placed it beside his blue notebook. He opened a fresh page. First snow. She ran here, not away. And the bowl listened. He let the candle burn a little longer that night. Outside, the bowls on the shelf seemed to lean toward the window as if they too were waiting for one more footstep in the snow. Part 14. The kiln that dreamed of spring. The snow stayed for 3 days, and on the 4th, the sky opened, not with sun, but with that gentle, golden gray light that feels like a promise whispered through clouds. Eun-ho sat before his kiln, not to fire it but to listen. It was an old habit, this listening. When he was younger, he believed kilnness could dream, that each fire left behind a memory. And now, in winter, the kiln slept with its mouth closed, warm only in its center, as if it held a slow-burning thought. He placed his palm on the brick. It was cool, still, at rest. Later, Sumi returned with a paper lantern shaped like a rabbit. "I made it for the bowls," she said, "so they're not scared when it's dark." Eun-ho chuckled. "Bowls don't get scared, but stories do," she replied. He had no answer to that. They made ink together that afternoon, charcoal and pine soot, mixing in a drop of sesame oil, and a dash of honey for kindness, Sumi insisted. She dipped the brush and wrote her name on a flat stone, then turned to Eun-ho. You should sign something, to Eun-ho. He hadn't signed a piece in years. Instead, he took the brush and wrote a single line on the kill door. Even fire can remember. Spring. Sumi tilted her head. Does that mean it's dreaming? Sumi tilted her head. Does that mean it's dreaming? Maybe, he said. Maybe everything is. That night, the wind changed. A softness in it. The kind that makes bells ring, even when no one touches them. Eun-ho watched the lantern rabbit sway gently on its string. He thought about time not as a straight line, but as a bowl. Round, deep, able to hold both loss and light. Before sleep, he lit the smallest candle he owned, opened his blue notebook, and wrote, The kill is quiet now, but the bowls are full of songs. Maybe that's enough. Then he closed the notebook, gently, let the candle burn down to memory, and rested. Sleepy Time Tale, the Korean potter who whispered secrets into every bowl he made. Part 15. The bowl that knew when to let go. Spring came quietly, not with fanfare or blossoms bursting open, but with the sound of melting snow dripping from the eaves, and the way sunlight lingered just a moment longer on the windowsill. Eun-ho noticed it first in the garden. The moss had begun to breathe, again, soft and green beneath the melting frost. A sparrow returned to the bamboo perch outside his window, hopping and blinking like it remembered the way. Inside the workshop, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. One morning, Sumi didn't come, nor the next, and Eun-ho knew she had grown into another season one that needed space. He didn't worry, not really. He knew the way clay dried, not with a sudden crack, but slowly, when no one noticed, so he waited, in silence, in memory. Weeks passed. One by one, he dusted each bowl, placed them where the sun could find them, even the old ones, even the imperfect. He found a box at the back of the shelf, sealed, but unsigned. When he opened it, he saw it held only one bowl. When he opened it, he saw it held only one bowl. His very first, lopsided, glaze uneven, a small thumbprint at the base. He cradled it and smiled. That evening, he brought it outside, set it on the garden stone, filled it with warm tea and nothing else. As the sky turned amber, he bowed to it gently, a thank you, for beginnings, for what had waited. Then he stood, walked back inside, and left the bowl there. The next morning, it was gone. Not shattered, not stolen, just gone. Only a blue feather left in its place, caught in the wind, resting in the moss. Only a blue feather left in its place, caught in the wind, resting in the moss. That night, Eun-ho lit a single candle, opened the blue notebook one last time, and wrote, The end. A bowl is just a pause in the clay. A hand is just a pause in time. Love is the silence between firings, warm and patient and full. He closed the notebook, placed it on the shelf, and turned out the light. Kill was cold. The bowls were still, but something hummed in the quiet. Not goodbye. Just sleep well.